At a hospital, a millionaire meets a poor black woman with an identical birthmark. As they investigate this coincidence, what hidden truth about their past will surface? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The stark white hospital room greeted Ethan Johnson as he regained consciousness. The steady beeping of medical monitors filled the air as doctors in white coats hovered around his bed, checking vital signs and making notes on their tablets. His family members stood at a distance, their expensive clothes and concerned expressions creating a scene that felt more like a business meeting than a moment of genuine connection. Despite being surrounded by people, Ethan felt completely alone. His head throbbed from the car accident, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the emotional isolation that had been his constant companion long before the crash. As a billionaire tech mogul, Ethan had grown accustomed to people treating him differently, always measuring their words and actions, never showing their true selves. Even now, as he lay vulnerable in a hospital bed, his family maintained their carefully crafted facades. The doctors explained his condition: multiple contusions, a mild concussion, and several broken ribs. They spoke in clinical terms, their words precise but distant. Ethan noticed how they directed their explanations to his father, a habit born from years of dealing with the Johnson family's influence. His sister Victoria stood by the window, more focused on managing the PR crisis on her phone than engaging with her injured brother. The isolation Ethan felt was anew. His wealth had always created an invisible barrier between him and others. Board meetings, charity galas, and business functions filled his calendar, but genuine human connections remained elusive. The accident forced him to confront this reality as he watched his family members shuffle awkwardly around his room, unsure how to interact with him outside their usual formal settings. When Aisha Carter entered the room for her shift, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Her presence brought a refreshing change from the sterile professional distance maintained by the other hospital staff. She approached Ethan's bed with purpose, but without the usual deference his wealth typically commanded. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her scrubs were wrinkled from a long shift, but her eyes were alert and focused. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Aisha Carter, and I'll be your nurse for the next 12 hours, she said, checking his foreline with practiced efficiency. As she adjusted his medication, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a distinctive birthmark on her wrist. Ethan's eyes widened. The mark was identical to the one he'd had since birth, a subject of countless conversations with doctors throughout his life. Aisha noticed his stare and followed his gaze to her wrist. Her movement faltered for a moment as she too recognized the matching mark on Ethan's wrist. The coincidence created an immediate connection between them, transcending the usual barriers of class and status that defined most of Ethan's interactions. Their conversation began hesitantly, but soon flowed naturally. Aisha shared stories about her work in the hospital, her voice carrying genuine passion when she spoke about helping patients. Ethan found himself opening up about his own life, sharing not the carefully curated version he presented to the media, but honest reflections about his struggles with isolation and the weight of expectations. As her shift drew to a close, Aisha's professional demeanor cracked slightly as she mentioned her mother's illness. The strain was evident in her voice as she described the challenging treatments and mounting medical bills. Ethan listened intently, recognizing in her words the same kind of quiet desperation he often felt, though for entirely different sons. Without thinking about the usual protocols and procedures that governed his charitable giving, Ethan offered to help. The offer came not from a place of obligation or public relations, but from a genuine desire to support someone who had shown him real kindness. Aisha's initial reluctance spoke volumes about her character, and their shared birthmark seemed to symbolize a deeper connection neither of them fully understood yet. This first day laid the foundation for something neither of them expected, a relationship that would challenge their preconceptions and force them to confront truths about themselves and their families that had long remained hidden. The accident that brought them together would prove to be just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would redefine what both of them understood about wealth, family, and genuine human connection. Ethan's discharge from the hospital marked the beginning of his search for answers rather than the end of his connection to that place. The matching birthmarks with Aisha haunted his thoughts, pushing him to question everything he knew about his family history. Sitting in his penthouse office, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had always defined him, he made a call to Marcus Reed, a private investigator known for his discretion and thoroughness. "I need you to look into my family history," Ethan explained to Marcus during their initial meeting. "Focus on any connections to medical workers, particularly nurses, or any unusual family patterns." He didn't mention the birthmark yet, keeping that detail private until he understood its significance better. Marcus nodded, his expression revealing nothing as he took detailed notes on his worn leather notebook. Meanwhile, across the city in a considerably different setting, Aisha struggled with her own challenges. The small apartment she shared with her younger sister felt increasingly cramped as medical bills piled up on the kitchen table. Her mother's condition required specialized treatment at Memorial Hospital, a facility known for its excellent care but also for its steep costs. Each shift at work reminded her of the vast disparity between her world and Ethan's, even as their unexpected connection pulled her thoughts back to him. Between her grueling 12-hour shifts, Aisha spent hours navigating insurance paperwork and making phone calls to medical billing departments. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, making each day feel like an uphill battle. Her colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes, but she brushed off their concerns with practiced smiles and changes of subject. The situation reached a breaking point when her mother's insurance denied coverage for an experimental treatment that showed promising results. Aisha sat in the hospital cafeteria during her break, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how to make impossible numbers work. The coffee before her grew cold as she stared at figures that refused to add up to anything but defeat. That evening, during one of their increasingly frequent conversations, Ethan noticed the strain in Aisha's voice. They had begun meeting regularly in the hospital garden during her breaks, their discussions ranging from casual observations to deeper reflections on life. This time, however, something was different. The usual spark in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "My mother," Aisha began hesitantly, "she's always been mysterious about our past. Sometimes, when the pain medication makes her less guarded, she mentions people and events that don't match anything I know about our family." She paused, running her finger over the birthmark on her wrist. "She talks about grand houses and family betrayals, but when I ask her about it later, she changes the subject." Ethan leaned forward, his own investigation into his family's past making this revelation particularly intriguing. "Have you looking into these stories?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral despite his growing excitement about the possible connection. "Between work and her care, I barely have time to sleep," Aisha replied with a bitter laugh. "Besides, what good would it do? The past is the past." But her voice carried a note of uncertainty that suggested she didn't fully believe her own words. "What if I could help you investigate?" Ethan offered, sharing his own decision to hire Marcus. "Sometimes understanding our past is crucial to moving forward." He saw the immediate resistance in her expression and quickly added, "Not as a favor or charity, but as something we could explore together. These mysteries might be connected." The conversation ended without a clear resolution, but it planted a seed in both their minds. Ethan returned to his investigation with renewed purpose, while Aisha found herself paying closer attention to her mother's drug-induced ramblings about the past. The matching birthmarks that had initially drawn them together now seemed like just the surface of a much deeper mystery. Marcus began his investigation, methodically working through decades of family records, while Aisha started recording her mother's stories on her phone, creating a puzzle piece by piece. Neither of them realized yet how their separate searches would eventually converge, revealing truths that would shake the foundations of both their lives. The revelations about the Johnson family's past hit Ethan like a physical blow. Marcus Reed sat across from him in his office, methodically laying out documents that painted a damning picture of generational corruption. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of suspicious donations spanning decades, all carefully concealed behind layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. The numbers were staggering: Millions of dollars funneled through charitable foundations that existed only on paper. Your grandfather started the practice, Marcus explained, pointing to financial records from the 1970s. He created a network of fake charities that laundered money from various business dealings. Your father continued the tradition, though he was more sophisticated about hiding the paper trail. The investigators' neutral tone made the revelations even more devastating. These weren't just abstract financial crimes. They were the foundation of the Johnson family wealth. Ethan stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, seeing his expensive suit and carefully curated image in a new light. Every luxury around him, every privilege he'd enjoyed, suddenly felt tainted. The weight of this inherited guilt pressed down on him, making it difficult to breathe. His whole identity as a successful businessman who'd built on his family's legacy crumbled as he realized that legacy was built on fraud. Meanwhile, across the city, Aisha made her own discovery. While organizing her mother's medical documents, she found an old manila envelope tucked between insurance forms. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings and faded photographs that told a story she struggled to comprehend. One particular photo showed a young woman who looked remarkably like her mother standing next to a man she recognized from the Johnson family portraits in the hospital wing named after them. The documents included letters that hinted at a deep connection between the families, though many details were obscured by time and careful editing. What was clear, however, was that the relationship had ended badly, with accusations of betrayal and stolen opportunities. Aisha's hands trembled as she realized these papers might explain her mother's mysterious comments about their past and the matching birthmarks she shared with Ethan. When Ethan and Aisha met again, the atmosphere between them was charged with unspoken tensions. They sat in the hospital garden, their usual meeting place, now feeling inadequate for the weight of their respective discoveries. Ethan spoke first, his voice strained as he tried to reconcile his feelings about his family's corruption with his growing feelings for Aisha. "I've been looking into my family's business practices," he began, carefully choosing his words. "There are things I've discovered that change everything I thought I knew about who I am." He stopped short of revealing the full extent of the corruption, fear of judgment warring with his desire for honesty. Aisha watched him struggle, the documents she'd discovered feeling like they were burning a hole in her bag. She wanted to reach out, to share what she'd learned, but something held her back. The history between their families was clearly complicated, and she worried that revealing the connection now might destroy whatever was growing between them. The tension in their conversation grew as Ethan continued to dance around the specifics of his discoveries. He spoke about reputation and legacy, his words carrying double meanings he didn't intend. "Everything I've built, everything I thought I was building on, it's all different now. I don't know how to move forward, knowing what I know." Aisha's silence in response to his partial confessions created its own kind of tension. Each unspoken truth between them added another layer of complexity to their relationship. The birthmarks that had once seemed like a fascinating coincidence now felt like a brand, marking them as participants in a story neither of them fully understood. As their meeting ended, both felt the weight of their secrets more acutely than ever. Ethan returned to his office to continue grappling with his family's corrupt legacy, while Aisha went back to her mother's bedside, the old documents raising more questions than they answered. The connection between them remained strong, but it was now shadowed by the growing realization that their family's past might be more closely intertwined than either of them had imagined, and not necessarily in ways that would make their present relationship any easier. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation as Michael Chen, once Ethan's closest childhood friend and now a prominent social activist, took the stage. The contrast between them couldn't have been starker. While Ethan sat in the audience in his tailored suit, Michael wore worn jeans and a simple button-down shirt. The projection screen behind him displayed shocking statistics about wealth inequality and corporate corruption. "The ultra-wealthy aren't just beneficiaries of an unfair system," Michael's voice carried through the packed auditorium. "They're active participants in perpetuating inequality." His eyes found Ethan in the crowd, and his next words carried the weight of their shared history. Take the Johnson family, for instance. Their philanthropic foundation makes headlines with grand donations, but where does that money really come from? how many lives were destroyed to build that fortune. Ethan felt the stares of hundreds of attendees turn toward him. Each word from Michael struck with precision, made more painful by the recent discoveries about his family's corruption. The worst part was that he couldn't disagree. His own investigation had revealed the truth behind Michael's accusations. His childhood friend had become his most articulate critic, armed with both moral authority and intimate knowledge of the Johnson family's world. Aisha sat several rows behind Ethan, having come to the conference out of curiosity about the man she'd been growing closer to. She watched Michael's presentation with increasing discomfort, torn between her instinctive agreement with the activist's message and her growing understanding of Ethan's personal struggles. The statistics about healthcare inequality particularly resonated with her, reminding her of her daily battles with the medical system on behalf of her mother. As Michael detailed specific instances of corporate malfeasance, Aisha noticed Ethan's shoulders tensing. She understood the complexity of his position, a man trying to break free from his family's legacy while being publicly branded as part of the problem. The activist's words about systemic change and accountability echoed her own beliefs, yet seeing Ethan's isolation in that hostile crowd stirred unexpected sympathy. After the presentation, Ethan retreated to his office, the weight of public scrutiny following him like a shadow. Hours later, he called Aisha with an unexpected proposal. "I want to make a significant donation to Michael's organization," he explained, his voice carrying a mix of determination and uncertainty. "Not through the family foundation, but from my personal accounts. And I want you to help me structure it." The proposal caught Aisha off guard. "Why me?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Her perspective as someone who lived with the daily realities of economic inequality could provide valuable insight into making the donation truly meaningful rather than just a public relations gesture. "Because you understand both worlds," Ethan replied. "You've seen healthcare from both sides as a provider and as someone fighting for family members' care." Penthouse. Aisha had arrived to discuss the donation structure, but the conversation quickly turned more personal. The city lights sparkled below them through floor-to-ceiling windows as they talked, creating an intimate atmosphere that made honesty feel both easier and more dangerous. "My mother," Aisha began hesitantly, swirling the wine in her glass. "She has information about our families, about how they're connected." She watched Ethan's expression carefully as she continued. "I found documents, old photographs. There's more to the story than either of us knew, but she's not ready to share everything yet. And honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to hear it all." Ethan absorbed this information, connecting it with his own discoveries about the family rivalry. The matching birthmarks on their wrists seemed to take on new significance, not just a coincidence, but perhaps a sign of their shared history. The weight of unspoken truths hung between them, making the spacious penthouse feel suddenly confining. "Whatever the connection is," Ethan finally responded, "it doesn't change how I feel about you." The words came out before he could consider their implications, adding another layer of complexity to their already complicated relationship. "But I need you to know that my family's past, it's darker than I ever imagined. The things I'm discovering." He trailed off, unable to voice the full extent of his family's misdeeds. Aisha recognized the conflict in his voice, understanding too well the challenge of reconciling someone you care about with uncomfortable truths about their past. Her own mother's reluctance to share their family history had created similar tensions. The parallels between their situations struck her, both of them trying to navigate relationships complicated by historical wrongs and unspoken truths. The dinner ended with more questions than answers, but also with a deeper understanding between them. They were both caught in a web of family legacy, secrets, and moral obligations that neither had chosen but both had to address. The donation project had become more than just a charitable gesture. It was increasingly looking like the first step in a longer journey of reconciliation and redemption. The hospital room where Aisha's mother lay held an atmosphere heavy with unspoken truths. After weeks of avoiding direct conversations about their family history, Maria Carter finally motioned for her daughter to sit beside her bed. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors provided a steady backdrop as she began sharing the story she'd kept hidden for decades. "Your grandmother and Richard Johnson grew up together. Maria began, her voice weak but determined. Not just as neighbors, they were cousins. The Johnson family had two branches, one that inherited the business empire and one that was gradually pushed out of the family wealth. She paused, gathering strength before continuing. Your grandmother was from the disinherited branch. She and Richard fell in love, but their relationship threatened the carefully maintained power structure within the family. The revelation hit Aisha like a physical force. The matching birthmarks suddenly made sense. They weren't just a coincidence, but a genetic trait passed down through shared ancestry. Her hands trembled as she absorbed the implications of this connection to the Johnson family, to Ethan. Maria continued, explaining how the wealthy branch of the family had systematically worked to erase all evidence of their connection to their poorer relatives. Documents were destroyed, records altered, and family members pressured into silence. The corruption Ethan had discovered was just one part of a larger campaign to consolidate power and erase inconvenient family connections. When Aisha finally shared these revelations with Ethan during a late-night meeting in his office, his reaction surprised her. Instead of shock or denial, she saw relief flood his features. The birthmarks T had initially brought them together now served as physical proof of their shared heritage, explaining the inexplicable connection they'd felt since their first meeting. This explains so much about the gaps in our family records, Ethan said, pacing the room. The missing photographs, the contradictory documents, the convenient accidents that destroyed certain records. He stopped at the window, staring out at the city lights. We're not just connected by coincidence, we're family. Distant cousins, but family nonetheless. Their moment of understanding was interrupted by news alerts on both their phones. The activist, Michael Chun, had scheduled another press conference, promising to reveal new information about corporate corruption. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as Ethan and Aisha were beginning to understand their connection, external pressures threatened to drive them apart. Ethan attempted to reach out to Michael, hoping to explain the complexities of the situation before the press conference. His childhood friend proved difficult to contact, his secretary citing a packed schedule of media appearances and organizing meetings. The distance between them, once bridged by shared childhood memories, now seemed insurmountable. In their private moments, Ethan shared with Aisha his growing fear that Michael's campaign against corporate corruption, while justified, might inadvertently expose family secrets that could hurt innocent people, including her mother. The revelation of their family connection would inevitably draw media attention to Maria's branch of the family, potentially subjecting them to unwanted scrutiny during a vulnerable time. The weight of their shared history created new complications in their relationship. Understanding their family connection explained their natural affinity for each other, but it also raised questions about the nature of their growing feelings. Were they drawn together by genuine connection or by the pull of shared DNA? The answer seemed both simpler and more complex than either of them had imagined. The revelation of their family connection created an invisible barrier between Aisha and Ethan, one that manifested in subtle hesitations and unfinished sentences during their conversations. Aisha found herself analyzing every interaction through this new lens, questioning whether their chemistry stemmed from genuine attraction or merely biological familiarity. During her hospital shifts, she caught herself absent-mindedly tracing the birthmark on her wrist, the symbol that had first drawn them together now serving as a reminder of their complicated connection. The corruption scandals surrounding the Johnson family continued to grow, with new details emerging daily in the press. Each headline felt like a personal attack to Aisha, who now understood that these stories weren't just about corporate malfeasance. They were about her family too, even if the world didn't know it yet. She watched patients reading newspapers with scandalous headlines about the Johnsons, feeling an unexpected urge to defend a family she had only recently discovered was her own. Ethan struggled with his own inner turmoil. His wealth, which had always defined him in the public eye, now felt like a burden of guilt. He knew that his branch of the family had systematically disenfranchised Aisha's relatives, redirecting what should have been shared family wealth into their own accounts. The contrast between his penthouse lifestyle and Aisha's modest apartment became a source of profound shame, representing generations of inequality within their own family. Their attempts to maintain professional distance at work became increasingly strained. During one particularly challenging day, when Aisha was coordinating care for a patient who couldn't afford necessary treatment, Ethan appeared in the hospital wing. Their eyes met across the nurses' station, and the weight of their shared history hung heavy between them. Both understood that he could easily solve this patient's financial problems, but accepting his help now carried complicated implications about power, privilege, and their intertwined family legacy. As evening fell, they found themselves in the hospital garden, their regular meeting place now feeling both comforting and constraining. "I can't keep pretending this doesn't change things," Aisha finally said, breaking their cautious silence. "Every time I look at you, I see both the man I've grown to care about and the embodiment of everything that was taken from my family." Ethan leaned forward, his usually confident demeanor replaced by genuine vulnerability. "I understand if you need distance," he replied, though the words clearly cost him. "But I also think we have an opportunity here. Together, we could reshape what the Johnson name means, make it stand for something better than corporate greed and family betrayal." The proposition hung in the air between them, representing both a professional challenge and a deeply personal one. Their growing romantic feelings complicated an already complex situation. They were distant enough cousins that any relationship wouldn't raise ethical concerns, but close enough that their shared family history couldn't be ignored. The pressure of maintaining appearances in public while privately grappling with these revelations began to wear on both of them. Aisha noticed her colleagues whispering about her frequent meetings with Ethan, while he faced increasing scrutiny from his board members about his changing approach to corporate governance. Their private struggles became entangled with public perception, creating a complex web of personal and professional challenges. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation as Ethan prepared to address the mounting allegations against his family. He had carefully prepared his statement, hoping to find a balance between accountability and protection, both for his family's reputation and for Aisha's branch of the family, whose privacy remained precarious. Before he could begin, however, the situation spiraled beyond his control. Several reporters had discovered Aisha's frequent meetings with Ethan, and their questions shifted from corporate corruption to personal speculation. A journalist from the Daily Chronicle stood up, smartphone in hand, displaying a photo of them in the hospital garden. "Mr. Johnson, can you comment on your relationship with Nurse Carter? Sources suggest your recent changes in corporate policy might be influenced by a romantic involvement with a staff member." The question sent ripples through the assembled media. Aisha, who had been standing near the back of the room to show support, felt dozens of cameras turned toward her. The professional distance she'd maintained at work suddenly collapsed as reporters began shouting questions about her background, her relationship with Ethan, and her potential influence over the Johnson fortune. In that crucial moment, Aisha made a decision that would alter both their lives. Instead of retreating, she stepped forward, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. "My relationship with Mr. Johnson began as a professional one, but it has evolved into a partnership based on shared values and a commitment to positive change. The healthcare system needs reform, and having someone with both financial resources and genuine concern for patient care is invaluable." Her impromptu speech, delivered with the same calm authority she used when handling medical emergencies, temporarily stunned the reporters. However, this moment of authenticity quickly spawned a new wave of speculation. By evening, social media buzzed with theories about Aisha's true motives, ranging from gold-digging accusations to conspiracy theories about corporate espionage. The hospital administration called an emergency meeting to address the situation. They expressed concern about the media attention affecting patient CA. And suggested that Aisha take a leave of absence until things settle down. The implied criticism in their tone, that she had somehow betrayed professional boundaries, stung more than the media accusations. Meanwhile, Aisha's mother's condition deteriorated, requiring more intensive care. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as Aisha needed to focus on her mother's health, she found herself navigating a storm of public scrutiny and workplace tension. The strain began showing in small ways: missed medications, forgotten appointments, the kind of details she'd never overlooked before. Ethan watched this unfold with growing distress. His attempt to protect their shared family secret while maintaining corporate transparency had backfired, inadvertently drawing Aisha into the spotlight she'd never sought. The media circus threatened not just their relationship, but Aisha's career and her ability to care for her mother. The situation reached a breaking point when a tabloid published an exposé suggesting that Aisha's influence over Ethan was part of a larger scheme to redirect corporate funds. The article, though filled with speculation and half-truths, gained traction on social media, forcing both Ethan and Aisha to confront the reality that their private struggle had become irreversibly public. Ethan's decision to use his fortune for healthcare reform emerged from weeks of careful deliberation. He transformed an entire floor of Johnson Tower into a command center for charitable operations, hiring experts in healthcare policy and social services. The marble-floored space that once hosted corporate meetings now buzzed with discussions about medical debt forgiveness and community health initiatives. His transformation garnered significant media attention, but public opinion remained deeply divided. Some praised his efforts as genuine reform, while others dismissed them as elaborate reputation management. The pressure intensified when he announced a plan to redirect 30% of the Johnson Foundation's assets into a new healthcare trust, causing several board members to resign in protest. Aisha observed these changes from a complex position. Her professional insight proved invaluable in identifying genuine healthcare needs, but each public appearance alongside Ethan fueled fresh speculation about their relationship. Her colleagues' attitudes shifted subtly. Some grew distant, while others suddenly became overly friendly, clearly hoping to benefit from her perceived influence. The situation with her mother added another layer of complexity. Despite having access to better care through her connection to Ethan, Aisha insisted on maintaining professional boundaries, continuing to navigate the same healthcare system she was working to reform. This decision earned respect from her fellow nurses, but created tension with hospital administrators who couldn't understand her reluctance to leverage her relationship with their biggest donor. The inevitable confrontation between Ethan and Michael, his activist friend, occurred during a healthcare policy forum. Michael's criticism had evolved from general attacks on wealth inequality to specific accusations about the Johnson family's historical practices. Rebranding corruption as charity doesn't erase decades of exploitation, he declared to the assembled crowd. The Johnson fortune was built on deliberately denying healthcare access to working communities. The truth in Michael's words struck both Ethan and Aisha deeply, though for different reasons. They knew better than anyone how the Johnson family had systematically disadvantaged its own relatives, including Aisha's branch of the family. Yet they also understood that acknowledging this history publicly would expose sensitive family matters neither was prepared to address. During a private moment after the forum, Ethan confided in Aisha about his growing frustration. "Michael's right about the past," he admitted, pacing his office. "But he can't see that using this wealth to fix the system might be more valuable than destroying it completely." The weight of his family's legacy hung heavy in every word. Aisha found herself in a unique position of understanding both perspectives. Her daily experience with patients showed her the urgent need for immediate healthcare solutions, which Ethan's wealth could provide. Yet her family's history of disenfranchisement made Michael's calls for systemic change deeply resonant. "Maybe the answer isn't choosing between reform and revolution," she suggested carefully. "Maybe it's finding a way to do both." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the hospital. Her mother had taken a turn for the worse. As Aisha rushed to her mother's bedside, the personal and political dimensions of their situation collided. The same healthcare system they were working to reform was now fighting to save her mother's life, making their mission suddenly, painfully immediate. The truth about the Johnson family history emerged in an unexpected moment of crisis. As Maria Carter's condition worsened, she called both Aisha and Ethan to her hospital room. Despite her weakened state, her voice carried the weight of decades of silenced history as she revealed the full story of their family's connection. The rivalry between the Johnson branches hadn't begun with business disagreements, as everyone had assumed. Instead, it stemmed from a love story, one between Aisha's grandmother and Ethan's grandfather's brother. Their relationship had threatened the carefully arranged marriage meant to merge the Johnson business with another powerful family. When they refused to separate, the wealthy branch of the family orchestrated a complete erasure of their connection, using their influence to destroy records and pressure people into silence. The birthmark, Maria explained, her voice growing stronger with purpose, wasn't just a family trait. It was a symbol of rebellion. Those who carried it were descendants of the love match that defied family expectations. They tried to erase us from the family tree, but they couldn't erase the mark that proved our connection. This revelation transformed Ethan's understanding of his family's corruption. The illegal donations and financial schemes weren't just about greed. They were part of a generations-long effort to maintain power by denying their own family members their rightful inheritance. The matching birthmarks he shared with Aisha weren't just genetic coincidence, but physical proof of the justice their families had been denied. Understanding the depth of this history, Ethan made a decision that would reshape his legacy. During a hastily arranged press conference, with Aisha standing beside him, he revealed the complete truth of the Johnson family history. He acknowledged the systematic disenfranchisement of family members, the deliberate erasure of family connections, and the corruption that had maintained this system of inequality. The birthmark I share with Aisha Carter isn't just a coincidence, he declared to the stunned reporters. It's evidence of a family connection that was deliberately hidden. The Johnson fortune wasn't built solely on business acumen. It was built on the systematic exclusion of our own family members from their rightful inheritance. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with discussions about family legacy, corporate responsibility, and the intersection of personal and public justice. Michael Chun, watching from the audience, found his perspective on Ethan shifting as he realized their childhood friendship had been shaped by hidden family dynamics neither of them understood. In the aftermath of the revelation, Ethan announced a restructuring of the Johnson corporate empire. The healthcare trust he'd established would be expanded, with direct input from the previously disenfranchised family members. Aisha would serve as co-director, BR, bringing her medical expertise and personal understanding of healthcare inequalities to the foundation's mission. More importantly, their relationship, no longer constrained by secrets or divided loyalties, deepened into something neither of them had expected. The love that had brought their families together generations ago found an echo in their own connection, this time without the burden of secrecy or shame. Standing together in Maria's hospital room, watching her recovery under the care of the very healthcare system they were working to reform, Ethan and Aisha understood that their story wasn't just about correcting past wrongs. It was about proving that love, whether between individuals or for humanity as a whole, could transcend the barriers of class, status, and family history to create meaningful change. The birthmarks that had first drawn them together now served as visible reminders of both their shared past and their commitment to a better future, one where family bonds weren't measured by wealth or power, but by the courage to stand together for what was right.